Hello and welcome to another Magic Duels gameplay. Today we're revisiting the Black-White Lifegain Allies deck, which has gotten a lot of new cards since the latest expansion came out. So let's dive right into it here, starting out with Serene Steward, one of the key cards in the deck. For 2 mana we get a 2/2 ally, and whenever we gain life we can pay a single white mana to put a +1/+1 counter on one of our creatures. So we can gain life repeatedly with this deck, which means we can spend lots of white mana to put lots of +1/+1 counters on our creatures, even multiple counters in the same turn, which turns our small creatures into sizable threats pretty quickly. So one of the important cards in the deck for sure. Moving on, we have a new addition, Ondu War Cleric, also a 2 mana 2/2 ally with the cohort ability, so we can tap the War Cleric and an untapped ally we control to gain 2 life. So yet another way to gain life and trigger our many cards that benefit off of gaining life. And of course also just a 2/2 ally, which will trigger the rally abilities on our creatures and can also just attack for 2 damage, which is not bad. So a very synergistic card in this deck and a welcome addition. Then probably the most important card in the deck is Kalastria Healer, 2 mana for a 1/2 ally with the rally ability, and whenever he or another ally enters the battlefield under our control, each opponent loses 1 life and we gain 1 life. So a very nice life drain trigger. This effect is very synergistic with lots of cards that trigger whenever we gain life, and will stack quite nicely with multiples, so having multiple Kalastria Healers out is actually quite powerful. Next up we get to some of our efficient removal spells that we got with the latest expansion. Grasp of Darkness, double black to give a creature -4/-4 until end of turn at instant speed, which is quite good. And also Declaration in Stone, which exiles a creature and all the creatures with the same name, so very powerful against tokens, although we are giving our opponents a card back if we're exiling creatures with the clue token they get, but still pretty efficient for just 2 mana that can even exile indestructible permanents like Ulamog. Then we have Lantern Scout, which is also quite good with the rally ability, giving all our creatures a lifelink. So again, lots of life gain triggers going on, and also a 3/2 for 3 mana, which is not bad. Another new addition is Vampire Envoy, 2 and a black for a 1/4 flyer, and whenever the envoy becomes tapped we gain 1 life. So another way to repeatedly gain life and trigger all our cards that benefit from gaining life. Also just a 1/4, so can play defense quite well, works very nicely with the cohort from the Ondu War Cleric, because even if we tap the envoy with the cohort ability, we still get to gain the life and trigger potential cards. And once we put a few +1/+1 counters on the Vampire Envoy, she starts dealing lots of damage and is very hard to kill. So a welcome addition to the deck. Of course also an ally, so we'll trigger all the rally abilities. Then Drana's Emissary, one of the best 3-drops in the deck, since it's another repeatable way of gaining life and also dealing damage to the opponent. Also just a 2/2 flyer for 3 mana, so all powerful abilities here. Another new removal spell is Anguished Unmaking, 3 mana for an instant that exiles target non-land permanent at the cost of 3 life, which we can easily pay with all the life we're gaining. So this can answer planeswalkers or other problematic permanents besides creatures. Then we get to our 4-drops, where we have Bloodbond Vampire, 4 mana for a 3/3 that gets a +1/+1 counter whenever we gain life. So again, having those repeatable ways of gaining life is pretty important, because that means our vampire will get lots of +1/+1 counters very quickly, turning it into a very large threat for the opponent. And then a new addition here is Cliffhaven Vampire, 4 mana for a 2/4 flyer, and whenever we gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. So again, all those repeatable ways of gaining life now also deal an extra damage to the opponent, and a 2/4 flyer is also pretty good. Then we have a Gideon, ally of Zendikar, which can make allies with his 0 ability, so will trigger all of the rally abilities, and can also become a 5/5 and start beating down, or make an anthem and give our creatures +1/+1, so all powerful abilities in this deck. Then we have Archangel Avacyn, the only non-ally creature in the deck, but it's a pretty powerful one because for 5 mana we get a 4/4 with Flying and Vigilance at instant speed thanks to Flash, and when she comes into play she can save our creatures from removal spells or sweepers, so pretty valuable in a deck that plays lots of creatures. And then she can also transform into Avacyn the Purifier, which will end the game pretty quickly as well. Then we have Ob Nixilis Reignited, 5 mana for a Planeswalker that basically always kills a creature when he comes down, or can start drawing us more cards at the cost of some life, which again we can easily spare, and the ultimate also quite powerful. And then finally we have a Sorin Grim Nemesis, which also works quite nicely in this deck, since he can gain us life with his -X ability, and can also draw us more cards with the +1, or close out the game with his ultimate. And then our mana base, we've got a 9 plains, 9 swamps, 2 Shambling Vent, which is also quite nice as it's a life-linking creature, and then 2 Isolated Chapel and 2 Forsaken Sanctuary, because we do need lots of double white and double black in this deck. So that's the deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, let's take a look at our opener, which is a bit expensive here with a 4-drop and a 5-drop, but I think we can keep since we have a 2-drop creature plus a removal spell, and hopefully we draw into another cheap creature to go with the Cleric, but certainly a keeper. We can lead off with Forsaken Sanctuary, and that'll give us access to double black for the darkness. And otherwise we can just play out a Cleric turn 2. Alright, let's play out the Forsaken Sanctuary. And Drana's Emissary, a pretty nice draw here. It looks like our opponent is stuck on a 1 land, which is unfortunate. But we're just gonna play out our Ondu War Cleric. And next turn, probably just gonna attack for 2 instead of using the Cohort ability. So our opponent did find a second land. So we could play the healer, that way our vampire will get +1/+1 right away when we play her next turn, but I think just curving out with the emissary is going to be better for us, but might as well attack first for 2. And potentially by playing emissary here next turn we could go healer plus Grasp of Darkness if our opponent plays a creature we want to get rid of. So we will miss out on a few Kalastria Healer triggers. And our opponent did have a sweeper in Kozilek's return, but even playing the healer here would have meant losing all our creatures. So here I think we just play out Bloodbond Vampire, and then next turn we either go healer plus Grasp of Darkness or whatever we draw, or we can go with Archangel Avacyn end of turn. And our opponent with Nissa's Pilgrimage gonna ramp and find the lands they were missing. So up to 5 mana. And Lantern Scout is not bad, so we could keep up Archangel Avacyn if we're afraid of another sweeper or burn spell, but our opponent only has access to a single mountain, so there's not a lot of things we are worried about. Of course, if our opponent has Radiant Flames for 2, that would not be great for us, but our Vampire would still survive. So I think I'm okay with playing out the healer. We'll gain 1, the Vampire gets a counter, and then we can play out the Scout, gain another 1, put another counter on the Vampire, and then we get Lifelink, Vampire attacks for 5, and gets another counter. And there's not a lot of removal spells in green-red that can take care of a 6/6. And meanwhile our opponent is at 11 life. So they'll need something pretty good here to get out of it. 6 mana, Oblivion Sower is not bad. Opponent finds 1 land off of it. And exiled 3 creatures, so not too bad. and another Kalastria Healer. So let's see. We can play the healer, get 2 triggers, so this will become an 8/8, which forces a chump on our opponent, so we can attack with the Lantern Scout and the healer as well. So I think I like that more than Avacyn here. So let's go for it. Also gives all our creatures lifelink once again. So our opponent is going to have a hard time burning us out if that's their plan. So yeah, our opponent is forced to chump the vampire, so it's a free attack with the other 2. And we're just gonna let that happen. Our opponent drops to 5, and now we have an 11/11 vampire. Opponent with the Green Warden of Murasa is gonna get back one of their cards from the graveyard. And it's gonna be Oblivion Sower, but we can end of turn Grasp of Darkness the Green Warden. Opponent doesn't have any blockers left. They get back a Kozilek's Return, but with only 2 mana that's not gonna do it. We can even play out another Bloodbond Vampire, just to get all those rally triggers once again, and grow our vampire even larger. And the triggers do take a while, but there we go, and attack with everyone. And we end the game at more than 60 life. On to the next one. Alright, let's take a look at our opener, which we can't really keep with only 1 land. And this looks almost the same. And this one we can keep. Alright, we've got a playable 6 with double healer, War Cleric and Cliffhaven Vampire, which goes nicely with the healers. So just need to draw some lands to get up to 4. And Envoy is not bad, but again we do need some lands. Opponent starts out with Evolving Wilds getting a swamp, and another Evolving Wilds, which gets another swamp. But they probably are playing more than 1 color if they're playing Evolving Wilds. So here, no need to show the white mana yet, and just play out one of our Kalastria Healers and get those triggers going. A card we need to keep in mind, of course, is Languish, which can wipe away most of our creatures. But let's see. Black-white and our opponent with Call the Gatewatch. So they're playing a Planeswalker heavy deck, and they're getting Sorin, which is a 6 mana Planeswalker, so still pretty far away. But that probably implies they have a decent amount of sweepers in their deck if they're playing a Planeswalker heavy deck, which is not good news for us. So we could play the Envoy here, get a trigger off the Kalastria Healer, but I kind of like playing the second healer more, although it does play pretty poorly into a possible Declaration in Stone of the opponent. So I think that's maybe reason enough to go with the Envoy instead of the second healer. They both of course die to Languish, but by playing the Envoy here next turn we could go healer plus cleric to rebuild after a sweeper. So I think playing the Envoy is still fine. And then attack for 1. Cinderglade into a Kalitas for our opponent. Alright, so they have their own way of gaining life in play. So we could go healer plus a War Cleric here, but that's pretty poor if our opponent has a Radiant Flames, which they now have access to thanks to Cinderglade, since our opponent would get tons of zombie tokens. So I kind of like playing out the vampire more. So let's go for it. Main phase 1 of course, since whenever we gain life, opponent loses 1 life, and we'll be attacking with the Vampire Envoy here, which gains us a life. Since we can still block with the Cliffhaven Vampire if Kalitas should attack. So if our opponent has a sweeper, it's not looking great for us, but if they don't, then we might have a chance. Canopy Vista, and next turn probably Sorin will get played. So here we could block with the Vampire. That's pretty bad if our opponent has something like Radiant Flames, however, since then our Vampire will die. This could be an attack with our opponent planning to play a sweeper afterwards anyways, like Planar Outburst, which means this is kind of a free roll. So we're kind of in a tricky spot. Although I guess blocking is still fine. Because even if our opponent has something like Grasp of Darkness, they can't use Kalitas' ability anymore because they don't have triple black in play. So yeah, I think this is fine. Let's see how that works out. Opponent of course still gains 3 and languishes a play, so it wouldn't have mattered if we blocked or not, and our opponent now gets 3 zombies, so kind of the worst case scenario happened. So now we can play out Kalastria Healer into Ondu War Cleric, but our opponent likely has Sorin next turn. So not looking too great here. Opponent drops to 14, we go up to 26. So best case scenario, our opponent plays Sorin, kills one of our creatures, then we draw land and can kill their Sorin. But then our Sorin probably dies to their zombie tokens, and then our opponent still has 3 cards in hand. But they decide to plus Sorin, revealing Isolated Chapel, so Sorin at 7 loyalty. And instead of drawing a land, we draw Serene Steward. So we can play her, gain a life, put a +1/+1 counter on. We could put it on the healer itself, then tap on the War Cleric and Serene Steward to put another counter somewhere. I like putting it here since that's pretty nice against those 2/2 zombie tokens. And then we can wait with using the cohort ability unless we want to attack Sorin here. So yeah, if we attack with the Kalastria Healer, opponent can double block, and even if we put another counter here with the Steward thanks to cohort gaining us life, it still dies to 2 zombies blocking it and still only kills 1 zombie. So an attack here seems pretty poor. So I think we just have to skip attacks here and use the cohort ability end of turn and then decide where we want to put a +1/+1 counter. Opponent attacks with all 3, which is pretty aggressive. So how do we want to handle this? We can use the cohort ability right now, but that means of course we can't block. So I think we let this happen. And then block here, confirm blocks, and then use cohort, tapping the Serene Steward, doesn't really matter. Gain 2 life, and then put another counter on the Steward. And pay, so that way we kill both zombies, but our opponent probably has yet another sweeper here, so this probably doesn't matter. And there we go, Radiant Flames, so kind of a free roll for our opponent to attack there, but we kind of had to go through the motions anyways. Opponent with Sylvan Ranger getting a basic. And now even if we draw a land, our Sorin is not gonna catch up to the opponent's Sorin, which is now at 8 loyalty. reveals Anguished Unmaking, which can also just exile our Sorin. Drawing our own version of Anguished Unmaking would not be terrible. So what can we do here? We can play our Sorin -6 on the opponent's Sorin, but that doesn't seem great. So I think just activating Shambling Vent and attacking with it might be better. Plussing Sorin also seems pretty poor. So let's activate Shambling Vent, attack Sorin, and force a chum block probably with the Silver Ranger. Opponent lets it happen, alright. Sorin down to 6 loyalty. And our opponent has a Nissa Vast with Seer, which is also going to transform here when our opponent plays the Forest. So unfortunate matchup here, opponent with lots of sweepers in their deck as they reveal Planar Outburst, which is the weakness of the Lifegain Allies deck, unfortunately. There are some draws where you might draw Archangel Avacyn to save your creatures, or maybe you have lots of Planeswalkers which can take over the game, but most of the time a sweeper or two are gonna be pretty back-breaking. Opponent makes a token with Nissa. We can play Sorin -1 on Nissa to take care of it. We have 5 loyalty left, so the 2 creatures in play can finish off Sorin, so that's not even great. But don't have many options here at this point. We can play Sorin, -4 on the token, leaves it at 2 loyalty, and then our opponent's forced to use a turn with their Sorin to kill our Sorin. I guess that's our best bet. Since we don't have anything great that we can draw into, we know our opponent has Anguished Unmaking to get rid of our Sorin. But our opponent drawing basically 3 cards every turn now. And they do elect to use Sorin instead of Anguished Unmaking here. Plus Nissa reveals another land, but it's just gonna take a few turns now for our opponent to play a finisher and kill us. But we can try. Alright, on to the next one. Let's take a look at our opener, which is a bit awkward not having any 2-drop creatures. So I think we can do better. Alright, a billion tapped lands, but at least the cards are good. So we're kind of hoping to draw into a basic plains or basic swamp, so that the isolated chapel comes into play. Untapped, otherwise we're kind of just playing a turn behind every turn. Opponent with turn 1 Sanitarium Skeleton. Not a card you see very often, but can go well with effects that want you to discard cards, since you can buy it back. And Swamp is excellent, since now we can play out Kalastria Healer, and next turn this comes into play untapped, so we can play the Vampire Envoy. And the healer also blocks the skeleton quite well. Swamp, and does our opponent attack? They don't. And another swamp is also good, since that means Cliffhaven Vampire can get played next turn. So let's play out the Envoy and ship it back, since attacking doesn't make much sense. And find out what our opponent is up to. Mortuary Mire. So they do seem to have lots of graveyard synergies. And another plains. Well, at this point we kind of want to stop drawing lands if possible. But let's play out the Vampire. Thanks to the Kalastria Healer, our opponent loses 2 instead of 1 with the Vampire. And when we attack with the Envoy, our opponent will also lose 1 from our new Vampire. So all these little paper cuts are gonna add up and eventually kill our opponent. And next turn we can also consider firing up Shambling Vent. 4 mana. Does our opponent play sweepers like Languish? Nope. It's gonna be a Mindwrack Demon, which is actually not bad since it stops our flyers from attacking. But if our opponent doesn't have Delirium, they will start losing lots of life. They have an instant, a creature and a land, so they don't have Delirium quite yet. And Declaration in Stone is interesting, so we can get rid of the demon if we want to. Or we can hope that our opponent doesn't get Delirium and make our opponent lose 4 life. So let's see, if we Declaration and we attack, our opponent loses 3 plus another 1 from the Lifegain trigger. So they essentially lose 4. I don't expect our opponent to have lots of flyers in their deck, so getting rid of this one, which opens up an attack for 4 damage, which is the same damage that our opponent would take next turn, seems good. So yeah, I think I'll just get rid of this Mindwrack Demon. Also, exiling it is relevant if our opponent has Graveyard Recursion. And now we can attack with at least these 2. Opponent will lose 4 in the exchange and will gain 1. And we can play out the other Shambling Vent. And hopefully we can draw into some more ally creatures. Land number 5. And Guildleaf Winnower, not bad. Can kill our Cliffhaven Vampire. So a decent removal spell against our deck in general, since even Kalastria Healer has different power and toughness. Vampire Envoy is not bad. So I think we just attack for 1 in the air. And play out another Vampire Envoy. And next turn we can take a look at Shambling Vent if our opponent attacks with the Winnower. Opponent at 8 life. Hopefully they don't have ways to gain life. And there we go, Liliana. Exactly what we did not want to see. A life-linking creature. And a Nantuko Husk. So our opponent can transform Liliana right now if they would like to. They will attack with a Winnower. We're not gonna block. So we'll take 4. Opponent can sacrifice a skeleton if they want to transform Liliana and make us discard. They elect not to, because they maybe want to gain a life with Liliana. But now we do get to play Serene Steward, which will gain life. And opponent decides to sacrifice the skeleton right now, which is strange. So we'll put a counter on the Envoy. Now we can attack with the 2 Envoys, which 3, 4, 5, so we can deal 5 damage to our opponent. Opponent does have flashback in a graveyard, so it might be safer to kill Liliana right now. So let's do this. We'll put 2 counters on this Envoy killing Liliana, and then this one will deal 2 to our opponent, since I think getting rid of Liliana is safer. So we'll gain 2 life. The Steward will let us put 2 counters on our creatures, and we'll gladly pay. So Serene Steward plus Vampire Envoy, a nice little combo. Opponent takes 2, Liliana is dead. So I don't fully understand our opponent sacrificing the skeleton mid-combat there, since that gave us the window to attack Liliana with one of our vampires. And now our opponent is staring down at 2 lethal flyers. Necromantic summons can get back a creature. Opponent chooses to get back our Cliffhaven Vampire instead of their Liliana. And they did not have Spell Mastery at the time, so they do have a blocker for one of our creatures. If we draw an ally, that would be good. Another Vampire Envoy. Alright, so we want to make sure to tap black mana instead of white mana. And 4 counters means our opponent is dead on board here. Alright, well, we targeted the wrong creature here, unfortunately. Or no, never mind, we did target the vampire, so now we can attack with both. And then put 2 more counters there. Yeah, we can put 2 counters on the 2-powered envoy, so even if our opponent blocks a 4-powered envoy, they're still dead. Alright, so that worked out quite well. The little paper cuts starting to become more than just paper cuts, as we have 4/7 Vampire Envoys. Alright, on to the next one. Let's take a look at our opener, which looks pretty nice. We've got a nice curve of 2, 3, 4, so just need 1 land to make that work. So let's lead with Swamp in case we draw Grasp of Darkness and want to use it right away. And let's find out what we're up against. Evolving Wilds, so it's gonna remain a mystery. And here we can play out our planes into Serene Steward. And next turn, Drana's Emissary, which on our upkeep will gain us a life and make our opponent lose a life. And then we have to decide if we want to put a counter somewhere with the Serene Steward. If we do put a counter somewhere, then we can't play out the Cliffhaven Vampire, but we could still play out the Lantern Scout. So Ondu War Cleric doesn't change much, I believe. So yeah, let's attack for 2 and play out Drana's Emissary, which still seems like our best play. And then what we could do is next turn put a counter on one of our creatures and play out maybe the War Cleric. Opponent on double island, so don't have to be afraid of sweepers quite yet, but opponent probably plays a second color here, which is red. Alright, so opponent looks to be on the blue-red Thopter deck with Girapur Gearcrafter, so we don't have to be afraid of sweepers. We do have to be afraid of lots of Thopter tokens, so I don't mind making a big flyer with the Emissary, but I think getting the Cliffhaven in play right now might just be better than putting a counter here. So I don't think we pay here, since we can still just attack for 2. And then play out the Vampire. Don't want to trade our Steward here, of course. So instead of draining for 1, we'll start draining our opponent for 2 with the Emissary plus Vampire. And then of course next turn we can go Lantern Scout and or Ondu War Cleric, which will also gain us life and drain the opponent. So our opponent has 4 mana. They could have a Pia and Kieran or Whirler Rogue, which are the best plays on 4. Since Thopter Spy Network is not impressive when we can block the only Thopter token, and it is going to be Whirler Rogue. So they'll make 2 more Thopters. So now putting a counter on the Drana's Emissary would not be bad, since we can start making her large enough to attack into the Thopters. So I don't mind paying here. And we find a land. So now we can play out the Lantern Scout, attack with the Cliffhaven Vampire and put another counter on the Emissary, which then only dies to Exquisite Firecraft. Seems good. I don't want to trade the Emissary for 3 Thopters, I believe. I think Emissary is more valuable. Although if your opponent has giving the artifacts +1/+1, I will regret not wanting to trade, or at least get 3 damage in. So maybe attacking with the Emissary is fine here, since 1/1 Thopters are still reasonable, but once they become 2/2, they are kind of a problem. So yeah, let's offer the trade here and see if our opponent wants to accept. But they might not even want to, in which case the attack was good. Or they might chump. Nope, they go for the triple block, which is fine. Got rid of 3 Thopters, the Whirler Rogue's ability is not relevant anymore, and then we can still put a counter on one of our creatures, and I think we put it on the Vampire, since now Exquisite Firecraft can no longer kill it. Opponent down to 9, and then next turn Ondu War Cleric will trigger Rally once again, and then from then on can go with the Cliffhaven Vampire and Serene Steward to drain our opponent and put counters everywhere. This attack seems fine, we'll take 4. And another Whirler Rogue is fine. And a tapped Wandering Fumarole. Serene Steward is not bad. Unfortunately, we don't have any Kalastria Healers in play or Vampire Envoys to gain us life to put counters somewhere right away, but we'll make it work. So here, when we play the Steward, do we attack with the Lantern Scout and offer the trade with the Whirler Rogue? That seems kind of poor, so I don't think we do that. But we do want to trigger Rally main phase 1 here. And then we can distribute 2 +1/+1 counters somewhere. And then we can play the War Cleric post-combat, or we can keep it in hand to trigger Rally next turn. But if we play it out and untap with it, then Cohort is also a way to trigger the Stewards again. So I think playing out the Cleric is fine. So we'll just attack with the Vampire. We could offer a trade for a Steward, for a Whirler Rogue or 2 Thopters, but I still believe the Steward is more valuable. So let's just attack with the Vampire. Opponent chumps, which is fine. And then 2 triggers, we can put 2 counters somewhere. And I think we put 1 on the Scout and 1 on a Steward, just to spread out our counters a bit. And then next turn those creatures can attack into the 2/2 creatures on defense. And if our opponent doesn't kill the War Cleric, that's another way we can gain life and distribute +1/+1 counters. So we're looking pretty good here, but of course everything can happen in a game of Magic. And Pilgrim's Eye is probably not that thing that our opponent is looking for, but maybe their next play is. Thopter Engineer is not bad, giving all artifacts haste. And making another Thopter opponent with 3 power in the air, so they can't quite kill the Vampire yet. But the ground is locked up, Kalastria Healer an excellent draw, since that gives us access to lots of life gain triggers. So we can put 4 counters on our creatures this turn. I think we want to make a creature into a 5/5. So let's put 2 on this one. And then we can put some more on the Lantern Scout. So this one attacks, this one attacks, this one attacks. And then before damage we can use Cohort, tap down the healer, put 2 more counters on our creatures, and I think I'll put them both on the Lantern Scout. Since your opponent has so many 2-powered creatures in play, making a 5-powered creature seems good. So this way your opponent needs to put 2 2/2s plus a 1/1 in front of our 5 power and toughness creatures to kill them. They still need to chump the Cliffhaven Vampire, so they're in a pretty bad spot here. Maybe we could have even attacked with a Serene Steward. So those look like reasonable blocks. Alright, this is also fine. So 6 power, we have to decide if we want to kill the Thopter Engineer or the Whirler Rogue. I think killing the Engineer is more important. So we'll put the Engineer first, and then Whirler Rogue, and then a second Whirler Rogue. And our Vampire and Steward still survive. 3 triggers. Opponent goes all the way down to 2 life. And I don't know how they can get out of this, since we are at 43 life. And yep, opponent did not find a way to still win this game. So now we can attack with all these. Attack, use Grasp of Darkness on the Rogue, use Cohort, tapping down the Healer to put 2 more counters on our creatures. Let's put them both here. Opponent fires up the Fumarole, makes it into a 4/1. Goes to 1 from the Vampire. And now they go to blocks, so they're technically not dead yet, since they can triple chump, but now they're even in a worse spot than they were last turn. At 1 life, Alchemist's Vial can prevent our Vampire from attacking, but we can still use Cohort to drain our opponent out. And I think we'll finish this game in style. And our opponent is dead. I want to thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this gameplay. And as always, have a nice day.